All right. Good to have you again tonight. And I trust the Lord will meet with us and that it will be of benefit to you as we roll on closer to the end of this thing. Philemon chapter 1 and verses 17 through 19 is what we're going to be looking at this evening. You know, last week I think it was, or maybe it was even before that, but I had told you about a fragment that they had found, and I found it again. And this is a fragment of Philemon in the Greek. It's a papyrus piece from the 2nd century. So it would be, maybe 50 years or so after Paul died, or after he wrote it, somewhere in that time frame. So it was getting pretty close to the one. It was, I'm sure it was a copy of a copy, maybe even of a copy. I don't know, but I wanted to show that to you. And I mean, it's cool, and the letters were really big and all that kind of stuff. Guy's handwriting was cool. All right, Philemon's 1:17 through 19. So if you consider me your partner, receive him as you would receive me. If he has wronged you at all or owes you anything, charge that to my account. I, Paul, write this with my own hand. I will repay it. To say nothing of your own owing me, even your own self. So, Paul just kind of keeps the psychology going, and I mean he's bringing it to the end. Actually, this would be considered the peak. This is, some people would say, the grand climax of his whole writing up to this point. I mean, this is what he's been bringing it to. I think it was verse 8 and 9, somewhere in there is when he first mentions Onesimus. He built up to that and got it to that point, and then he says, Onesimus is he's my spleen, my noble innards, my heart, and he's a fellow Christian, and so therefore, I want you to take him back. Well, and then so he's been building all of that, and he's been giving different reasons for that. Like if you've been keeping track, I don't know what kind of notes you've been taking, or you may not have been taking any kind of notes, and if not, that's fine. You didn't have to. But it's been, I think, an interesting study, at least for me. But if you break it down, in these last couple verses, he's the whole basis for his plea. He starts off first of all in verses 10 through 14, and he's talking about how valuable, he was useless at one time, but now he's useful to you. He's useful to me, making a play on his name and all of that, and it probably to get Philemon to at least go, oh, Paul, just to kind of break the ice to a certain extent, but at the same time letting him know there's value in this person. I mean, society looks at him as a tool, a slave, nothing more than a commodity. You have to look at him as a Christian brother. He's elevated to the same plane as the rest of us, where there's not male or female, the whole picture of this. So there's value. That's the first part. The second part, and that's found in verses 15 to 16, is the fact that God's hand is behind all of this. And this would have to do with the fact, if you pull out a map and you look at it, and I should have put a map in here, and I'm sorry. Leaving Colossae or Laodicea, and we've used that before, and I should have just pulled that slide up, but he either went all the way up the Horn there and it, in through Eastern Europe and then down into Italy and all the way to Rome, 600 800 miles, or he took a ship and went. But either way, it would have been a giant endeavor on his part. The last thing that he probably wanted to do was to run into Philemon's friend, Paul. But it was exactly what God had planned. And then he's won to the Lord. He's been taught the Christian principles, and now he's developed into not only a conscientious Christian that realizes that, we have responsibilities and we have to meet those responsibilities, but he's also a brother in Christ. And so everything has changed because God's hand is in it. And so therefore, Philemon needs to do the next step. It's also, and this is more dealing with Paul and Philemon, and that's in verses 17 through 19, and that's in the relationship that they have. And in fact, if we break this down, the way I like to do this, so if you consider me your partner, so that's the first part, and he starts off. If you consider, the word consider means to hold it. If we really are partners in this Christian endeavor in in winning souls to Christ and advancing his kingdom, I mean, if this is really what we're about, I need you to do this favor for me. I'm gonna ask you to do a solid for me, man. It's vital. It's important. It affects my whole heart. So please help me out here. He has the connections, or is dealing with the connections of the faith, love, hope, all these things. And he says, okay, this partnership, Paul and Philemon Incorporated, or Philemon and Paul Incorporated, or however you want to look at it, we're going to bring a junior partner on. And he's going to be working with you. It's going to be, from this point on, it's going to be Philemon, Paul, and Onesimus. So, notice the if then. Now, one of the things, too, that's involved in this, and you'll find this a lot of times in Scripture, when you have an if, it isn't always necessarily dealing with a doubt or a possibility from that standpoint. Remember how in the Gospels, when Satan is confronting Christ and he says, since or if you're the Son of God. Well, in that context, it should be, since you're the Son of God, do this. Since you're the Son of God, worship me. Since you're the Son of God, whatever the situation might be. And so in this here, since you consider me a partner, since we are connected in this whole endeavor of winning souls, this missionary outreach, all these things that we're doing, since you and I are connected in this way, then I need you to receive him the same way that you receive me. And in fact, I mean, quite honestly, you could take it further than that. The idea behind this is, so we're partners, receive him as me. And, the whole picture then changes from this to the next verse. Now, sometimes if is if, and I think that in this case it is. I mean, there's been others that translate it, but if, which I guess you could do that. But we've been looking at this and seeing, Paul's master hand at work as far as being able to get people to think from the right perspective and using the happy sandwich and all the psychological abilities that he had to be able to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. But there's another player in this. And we find that, almost in every writing in the Bible, you have God's side and then the other person's side. That's the focus of the story at that point. And here at this point, of course, is Philemon. And Paul has dropped not just one bombshell, but a number of them. I mean, hey, guess who's home? And here he is standing right in front of him with this letter. Guess who's changed? Here he is standing in front of you with this letter. Guess what Paul wants? Well, it has to do with the guy that's standing right in front of you with that letter. And so you have that. Would you say Philemon maybe a little bit shell-shocked? Have you ever had someone give you news that was just way beyond what you was expecting? Not to bring my health into it too many times here, but when the doctor told me I had cancer, I mean, that was one of the things that I thought was a possibility, but it wasn't what I wanted to hear. And those times when they say something like that, then he's like, oh, and it's 3B and all of that. All of a sudden, everything else gets quiet. It's just like, I mean, I have a little bit of tinnitus anyway, but all of a sudden all you hear is just the ringing and everything else fades off into the distance a little bit. Can you imagine Philemon in this situation with this guy, this person, this thing that was his that ran away, and all the feelings that would be going through his mind? And then here he is in his smiling face and his letter, and and Paul has already said so many things, so many nice things. And I'm I can just imagine Philemon at this point, his head almost exploding. I mean, how does he deal with all of this? And he's like, oh, well, when we're Christians, it's easy for us to forgive and forget, and why we just, I mean, there's some of the old songs, when they call us names, we just look up to the sky, That's not what normally happens. People call us names or do something. It cuts us to the heart, is what it does, honestly. We may be able to put a good Christian front on, and with God's help we do, because blowing up and being mad and those kind of things really doesn't accomplish anything for God. And he can check us and keep us from getting too badly bent out of shape in circumstances. But that doesn't mean that we aren't cut. It doesn't mean that we're not hurt, that we don't feel betrayed, that we don't feel wounded, that, brokenhearted or whatever it might be. Paul, writing in another place, tells us, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Be angry and sin not. And it's talking about the fact that these are emotions that God has given us, but sin can take and twist out of kilter. And that we have a responsibility to hold them in check and deal with them. Bring them to God if nothing else, but let him help us deal with the circumstances. And so here's Philemon. There's Onesimus right in front of him. Here's the letter. It's been read. And Paul says, if he's wronged you, one person says, the Greek says this, but if thou art not inclined to receive him because he has wronged thee. You think Paul figured that might be a possibility? Do you think that might have been a possibility? Sure. We're to love our brethren, but we're not going to like all of them. Some of them we can tolerate because of God's grace, but they're not going to be our best buds, And so here's this situation, and he knows that there's going to be some objections in Philemon's mind, if nowhere else. They may not come forward, but they're right here. And so he's going to deal with them right here at this point. And so, there's that, what I just read to you. And again, I keep changing things on this because I realize that when I do it on my one program, everything looks good. The colors are standing out and all that. When I put it up on here, it's like there's a light behind it, which there's not. But it makes them hard to read. And so I'm gonna keep working on it. We'll get colors that'll be easy to read. Looks like the blues work better against this brown background than anything else. So maybe blues and purples are where we're going to have to go. But if he's wronged you, or if he owes you anything. Excuse me. Now, to me, that was kind of interesting. If he has wronged you at all, or owes you anything. The wronged you, that's a given, right? I mean, he ran away. He had wronged his master. But what about the owing? Well, that has to do with social system back then. The slaves were notorious for pilfering, and petty thievery. If they could get by with it, because if they got caught, they got punished severely. But it was kind of a thing, If you ever seen Hogan's Heroes, and they have to cabbage things to accomplish what they want to accomplish, it's kind of along the same line. You had your two fronts, and you had the guys that owned them, and then you had the slaves, and the slaves were constantly, at loggerheads with the masters. And one of the ways that they would do this is by petty thievery, by sabotage, those kind of things. And Paul, writing in another place, talking to the slaves, tells them, you can't do that. As Christians, and we could translate it to us today in working for people, we have to give them the best service that we can. We're taking their money, give them what they were owing them because of the fact that we're actually doing it for Christ, and we're doing it to glorify His name. And so Paul lets them know, you can't act the way that the rest of them act. You have a certain responsibility because of the level that you're at now. And so here, if he owes you anything, I mean, some write, because this is the only place that we have that would even suggest that he had stolen anything. And I don't like arguing from silence on a lot of things. It really doesn't pay. It's best to stay with context as much as possible. But when you take the historical context as well, and again, we look at the fact that he left Colossae or Laodicea, wherever it was, and went all the way to Rome, 600, 800 miles, it would have taken finances to get him there. He's a slave. He's not going to have a lot of finances. He had to get them somewhere. Probably the easiest way would be to steal them And so it's very possible that that's the situation. But again, that's taking a whole lot out of a whole little. So you have to be careful with it. You need to just stick with things as close as you can. But Paul says, if he owes you anything, charge it to my account. and that's interesting as well. William Barclay writing on this, it was kind of interesting because he said, okay, how was he able to pay this on Onesimus' debts? And he said, every now and again, we get glimpses that show that he was not without financial resources. Now, again, he's kind of arguing from silences a little bit, but we'll let him in this circumstance. Felix kept him prisoner, for he had hopes of a bribe to let him go. That's Acts chapter 24, verse 26. Whenever I'd thought about that, I'd figured that he was hoping Paul's friends would bribe him, but it's very much a possibility that he was thinking that Paul was wealthy enough to do it. Also, there's the fact that, Paul's writing this letter while he's a prisoner in Rome and living in a house in his own expense. I think actually probably an apartment, but still living in a hired place. He probably wouldn't be able to build a whole lot or make a whole lot of tents there in that situation. And especially having his arm chanting, you can see him, hey, Harold, come over here. I need to sew this up. I need your arm over here where I can do this, So I really don't think he was doing that. I think that we have, when he was writing to the Philippians and he thanks them for their financial assistance. But there's a good possibility that he did have means. And so that this is what he was going to use to cover the debt. Now, it's also interesting because the whole picture that we have here, this is something that all of us have experienced, that are Christians. Over in, did I not get it down? I meant to, and I didn't. Colossians chapter 2 and verse 14. You're going to have to look it up. I was pretty sure that I put it in here. I think I made a slide and I must not have got it up. But it's the same kind of situation. It has to do with the song. You remember this song? One of the courses. A lot of times we just sing the first part of it, but there's 2 or 3 verses. He paid a debt he did not owe, and I owed a debt I could not pay. I needed someone to wash my sins away. And now I sing a brand new song, Amazing Grace. Christ Jesus paid a debt that I could never pay. My debt he paid upon the cross. He cleansed my soul from all its dross. I thought that no one could all my sins erase. But now I sing a brand new song, Amazing Grace. Christ Jesus paid a debt that I could never pay. And this is, we've all experienced that are Christians. Jesus paid our debt. And so Paul is just taking it the next step and saying, okay, look, I know Onesimus owes you. Charge it to my account. And what's interesting is that this whole layout here, this part of the verse, and then verse 19, would have been considered legal in Rome, in that society. This is actually an IOU. It's a written out receipt. I will pay Onesimus' debt to you. It's pretty strong. Now what's also interesting is this, and this is one of the things that they argue about on this letter, because he says, I, Paul, write this with my own hand. I'll repay it. Did he write the whole letter in his own hand, or did he just write this part? If you go over and there's different passages. 2 Corinthians 9:4. Oh, this is dealing with the other thing. We'll come back to it. Romans 16:22. I, Tertius, who wrote this letter, greet you in the Lord. So Romans actually was written by Tertius, and then Paul signed it. 1 Corinthians 16:21. I, Paul, write this greeting in my own hand. And in Galatians 6:11, see with what large letters I'm writing to you with my own hand. And so here he says this, I write this with my own hand, I will repay it. I don't think he wrote the whole letter. I think Tertius or Philemon or Onesimus, who knows? Someone, not Philemon, Titus or one of those guys. But anyway, somebody that was there probably wrote the letter for him as he's dictating it. I can always see him kind of pacing back and forth. And that'd be kind of interesting with the soldier. I wonder if the soldier had to pace with him. I don't know. But, and then when he got down to the end, then he would write a little bit to show that it was actually his. It would be kind of like, almost like his signature. I write this with my own hand. I will repay it. If he owes you anything, charge it to my account. I will repay it. But he doesn't stop there. Then he says, to say nothing of your owing me. And the message has, I don't need to remind you, do I? But that's not really what the Greek idea is. The New Living probably gets closer to it. This is a special rhetorical advice, paralipsis. And what he says here is, I won't mention to you that you owe me your very soul. Well, guess what? He just did. But it was a special rhetorical advice, and it was kind of like, when something happens and you've been trying to help somebody in a situation, and they went ahead and went against your advice and did what they wanted to do, and you say, I ain't going to tell you I told you so. And what did you just do? Yeah, you told them I told you so. But it's saying it in a nicer way, because you could just say, I told you so. And that was in 2 Corinthians 9:4. Otherwise, if some Macedonians come with me and find that you're not ready, we would be humiliated. To say nothing of you, it's the same. That's exactly the same thing. And I won't even mention how humiliated you would be. I wouldn't even care to bring that up. I wouldn't even care to say that. And that way you've said it without saying it. And that's exactly what he's doing here. And by doing this, he's giving the one last anchor point for Philemon. The one last nail in his coffin. He's, I'm not even going to say how much you owe me, but I'll pay everything that Onesimus owes you. And all I ask in return is that you receive him as a fellow Christian. We're not told how Philemon reacted to Onesimus. Tradition in the church fathers, there's actually a mention of a bishop Onesimus, but we aren't told that it was really him. It could have been anybody with that name, I guess. But I really believe in this situation, there's no way he can do other than say, okay. I mean, Lord, give me grace and help me to love my brother, something along that line. But a lot of it would have to do with that course that we just looked at, because, that would be the major thing. He paid a debt he didn't owe, and I owed a debt that I could not pay. And with his amazing grace, I can extend that grace to all those around me, and forgive their debts as my debts have been forgiven me. It's something that Christ laid out for us to do. So take this and grow. It's what we got to do. So thanks for being here with me. The Lord bless you. I hope you have a great week. And Sunday we'll pick up with Ecclesiastes, and we'll talk to you later. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. The Lord bless you.